Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to the Community IT webinar, our annual Nonprofit Cybersecurity Incident Report. We're really happy to be able to share this up-to-date data with you on the types of incidents we're seeing among the clients that we manage, which can help you be more prepared and able to prevent the most common attacks. My name is Carolyn Woodard.
My name is Matt Eshleman, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT. Just a little bit about the definitions we talk about in our report. So again, threat actor, that's kind of the person. And I think it's helpful to think of it that way, right? It's not just some nameless entity, right? They're actually people on the other side of the computer that are sending you those spear phishing messages that are financially motivated to get you to pay something. So I think it's important to understand that kind of that's what we talk about, right? A threat actor. We have the security incident. So that's whenever we have, the makings of an issue, right? So that's something that could potentially compromise the integrity, confidentiality, or availability of an information asset. Whereas the breach is actually kind of a confirmation that something has actually happened. So something bad has actually happened. MFA, that's multi-factor authentication. Again, that combines something that you know, which is your password, along with something that you have, which is often an app on a smartphone, or it may be something like a physical security key that could count as multi-factor authentication. Single sign-on, again, a little bit counterintuitive, but again, gives us a kind of a managed and secure way to have one really well-protected username, password, MFA combination that allows us by policy then to get into the applications that we need. And in larger organizations, this can be great because it can also help remove access to applications. So again, as staff are onboarded, they're granted applications. When they leave, one place to remove access to applications. We have spear phishing, where those are targeted messages that combine some unique information about you and your organization, and where the sender is obfuscated, right? So we don't know, who's actually sending the message. Spoofing, again, would be a similar, perhaps used in conjunction with spear phishing to, again, obfuscate who's sending it, make it appear like it's coming from your own organization or a colleague, to kind of mask the identity of a sender. We have ransomware. So that would be the attack where files are encrypted. Then to get access to that information, you need to pay a ransom, right? And so that, again, comes back to this financial motivation. Typically, that's paid in cryptocurrency because it can be anonymized. And so that's why it's a favorite of these threat actors, is that they can anonymously get paid. And then we have supply chain attacks. And again, that can be an attack where, maybe you're doing everything right for your own organization, but you're working with a partner, or you have your data hosted somewhere, or you're in a hosted system, and that vendor is compromised. And then you, as a result, are impacted. So again, particularly because we have a lot of cloud solutions in place, there can be supply chain attacks that impact organizations, even if kind of you yourself are not have not been exploited, but maybe the vendor that you were using, they had a ransomware attack, for example.
And a lot of these terms are on our website as well, so you can look through our cybersecurity resources there.
Great. Well, yeah, let's dig into it. And we've been talking a lot about kind of the big picture. And so I think it's helpful just to understand the sample size that we are talking about. So as I mentioned, Community IT, we're at the end of last year, about 6,500 endpoints. So we had about 500 increase from our sample in 2021. We continue to see organizations move to the cloud, and that's been a big part of our work as organizations move hybrid, migrate to other systems. The number of servers in play is really shrinking. Windows workstations growing, holding steady a little bit. We've had a lot of growth in our Mac support environment. So that's our sample size that we are, that we're looking at. And I'd say what we didn't include here is kind of all of the alerts that were blocked. And so, right, if we would include all the spam messages that our systems blocked, or all of the, suspicious threats that were blocked on the endpoint, there'd be hundreds of thousands of results. And so we're really focused on, those kind of security incidents where things caused us to take another look or kind of, were submitted to us by end users. So again, you can see 11,000 targeted phishing attempts were proactively blocked by some of our support tools. Over 1,000 suspicious threats were detected and automatically eliminated. And so we have a lot of those systems and processes in place to block and prevent things from even happening. So again, we can be efficient in our response. So when we look at the cybersecurity incidents, we kind of have broken this apart a little bit to provide some more context. And first, kind of talking about like high risk threats. So whenever these kinds of tickets come into our system, they get a lot of attention. And so the first one there is we call brute force attacks. This is something we added last year, and so that is a message to us that an organization's typically the on-premise resources are being targeted. So again, if you still have servers in your office, and those are open to the world at all, right? Even if it's remote desktop or you're hosting a web page, those systems are being targeted all the time. And if you have a misconfiguration in your firewall or some other problem, that will show up as, just hundreds and thousands of failed login attempts. And so that, really throws a lot of triggers for us in order to react and respond to make sure that we're closing the door, because, threat actors are still relying on, server infrastructure to initiate a lot of attacks. And so whenever monitoring systems detect that, lots of red flags go off, and we have a quick response to identify the problem and put in remediation in place. The next highest number we had here was compromised accounts. And so you see that confirmed, right? We had, I think, suspected in the medium risk, right, was over 250, right? This has become an area where we do a lot of investigation. This number is relatively low, but it's not zero. Even with all the emphasis that we've had on implementing multi-factor authentication, organizations have not been able to do that 100%. And we are actually seeing cases where even with folks with multi-factor authentication, they can be tricked into giving away codes or finishing an MFA request, in an interaction with a threat actor. So we see compromised accounts still occurring at a relatively high rate. Because of the work that we do, a lot of our clients are here in the Washington, D.C. area, in their think tanks and policy area. We do see quite a few of those advanced persistent threat actors. And so again, those are typically nation state entities that are trying to get into policy organizations, again, to figure out what people are doing, and then gain information about the researchers or the individuals themselves. So that's what brings us in conversation to the with the FBI in order to respond to some of the events. Talking about wire fraud, again, we did have a number of cases this year amongst our clients where they were victims of wire fraud. Typically, those are combined with a compromised account. So if an organization has an account compromised in the finance department, typically the threat actor will then use that information to try to update payment information with the bank, or even with other with other partner organizations. Similarly, we are also seeing cases where maybe an organization is interacting with one of their partners who has been impacted by an account compromise, and so they don't maybe have a two-step or verification process or a independent channel to verify payment changes, and so they will initiate a change in wire transfer information at the request of a partner, and it turns out that partner account is compromised as well. So that was something that we saw occur a number of cases where there were deficiencies in both the organization's controls and then also at the bank as well. Kind of the final high risk threat is ransomware, which for us was zero last year. I think for organizations that do have on-premise server infrastructure, this is continuing to be a high threat. I think in the market in general, ransomware is still occurring at a kind of at record levels. I think for smaller organizations that are largely in the cloud, like this is probably not the highest risk that you face, but it certainly is has a high severity if it occurs. And so again, that's how we kind of think about these high risk threats, is to provide a little bit of context, right? So if we look at something where we look at the severity of a specific event multiplied by its likelihood of happening, right? So low severity threats like spam, have a high likelihood of occurring, but they're not going to cause much impact and can easily be ignored or ignored, right? Other threats, like account compromise, have a much higher risk level because of the severity that risk represents, right? If your organization's executive director's account is compromised, then it effectively means that the threat actor has access to all the information in your organization, all the emails. And so again, that could trigger a cyber liability insurance claim, may require a lot of different reactions for the organization just to respond to that. So so the things that are in that high risk threat, really we treat with a lot of urgency because of the impact that it can cause. So again, brute force attacks typically mean your infrastructure is being actively targeted. Account compromise means that somebody other than the named or trusted user has access to that account. Advanced persistent threat actors, right? It means the bad guys are in your network are really targeting you. And then wire fraud, again, obviously with significant financial loss there. So so those are the things that we view as really high risk threats. In the medium risk area, we see things like those suspected compromised accounts, and that can be alerts that we receive from our system. A suspicious login is detected or blocked, and then maybe we need to go and investigate. Is that actually the user authenticating from a new location or a new device? So that requires some investigation to rule that out. And then the same thing here with business email compromise or kind of spoofing. So again, those messages that I'm sure we're all familiar with receiving, where it looks like it's coming from your executive director. Can you buy me gift cards? Or hey, I need to update this wire payment information. Or hey, can you update my payroll information? I just changed new banks, and it looks like it's coming from a colleague. So those maybe aren't as urgent or imminent of threats, but if they turn out to actually be successful, then they can move into a different category. And then finally, it's interesting here in the low risk threats, we have things like spam, which we already talked about, being relatively easy to identify and also delete. But then we also have things like malware and viruses, which I would say for us and our customers, it looks like a relatively high rate. I think most of those end up being kind of pop-ups, or maybe they're the beginning of a scam to try to get you to call a support number and buy antivirus protection for your computer or something like that. But what we found is that those are relatively easy to address and remediate, and they often don't turn into an actual active wire fraud or something else. And so we, for as much buzz as viruses get in terms of the common security industry discussion, what we find is that for devices that are up to date, they're patched, they have endpoint protection on it, the actual risk of viruses are relatively low. And so while it's important to have those good foundational tools in place, I like to really make sure that we're focusing on, email protection, identity and account management as strategies, because that's where, we see the highest risk related to, threats occurring. So if your account is compromised, that's really bad. And that happens a lot more often than we see with, for example, a virus getting on a computer or something like that. So you can see, overall, we've categorized about, almost, 940, 950 events across the organizations that we're serving. Those numbers are kind of increasing over time. And so we've got a couple of different breakdowns of the account compromise from that historical perspective.
I have a question. And do you recommend BitLocker be used on end user computers to encrypt the hard drive? And are there risks to using BitLocker?
So yes, I think BitLocker, or encrypting your hard drive in the good way, is a great security practice. It's part of our standard computer setup. And effectively what that means is if your computer is lost or stolen, you don't have to worry about reporting that as a potential data loss, right? So BitLocker encrypts your hard drive. So if somebody else gets access to that device, the data is effectively useless to them. And then again, we've got some of our high priority, high threat issues related to wire fraud. The threat, the advanced persistent threat actors or nation state actors, kind of increasing over time. So again, the wire fraud one is, I think, the thing that really has stuck out to me as an area that has requires renewed focus, I think, because it's not just a cybersecurity control, it's a policy and it's a process control. I think we did a webinar with YPT, your part-time controller, about this. And I think that contained a lot of great information about organizations that are looking at, kind of how to protect themselves about this, because it's clear that it's a threat. And, if a hacker can ask you to wire them $100,000, like, that's way easier than writing, a crypto malware, sending it to emails, getting somebody to install it, having them follow up with you, getting Bitcoin, right? Like, it's just easier to ask for money. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this, focus and energy really go into spear phishing, with the ultimate goal of, something as simple as gift cards, or something as lucrative as, updating wire payment transfer information, because, like I said, it's a lot easier to just, ask for $100,000 than it is to get a ransomware award in that amount. So what do we do with all this information, and how do we take this from, all right, we see these things happening now, how do we respond? So I would say that I think a couple of big takeaways for me. So number one, I think it's really critical that organizational leadership, understands the risks that they face, right? This cyber, incidents is not something that happens to other people. And it's something that happens, every organization is at risk. And again, just because you're a small organization, or just because you have a fantastic mission, does not mean that you're going to be immune from these threats. You may be more vulnerable to these threats because you haven't implemented security awareness training, or you haven't implemented these automated systems to update your computers and have endpoint protection and kind of all of those things in place, right? A hacker is just looking at you as a dollar sign, right? And so if you can get tricked into giving them $500 worth of gift cards, they're going to, take that. If they can trick you into wiring them $50,000, they will do that. So every organization needs to understand that they're a target. It's financially motivated. They don't really care about you. It's all about the money for most of these threat actors. At the same time, it's not all bad. We're seeing many of the cloud vendors that we're using enabling secure configurations by default. I think it's taken a long time, probably too long, for organizations to do things like enforce multi-factor authentication and implement these other security controls. And so the vendors are leading the way to some extent in terms of making organizations follow these best practices. So we are seeing that happen. Again, Salesforce has required MFA. Microsoft is enabling kind of secure by default. There's a lot of those other actions where the vendors themselves are saying, "Hey, this is important. We're seeing our clients get exploited, and so we're going to take some steps to help ensure that doesn't happen." All that really is done in service of preventing account compromise. Because again, it's really at the root of so many other bad things, right? If your account is compromised, then that threat actor has access to all of your data. They can impersonate you to your partner organizations, to your bank, to your vendors, to your funders, and that really is a massive risk to organizations. Taking all the steps available that you can to protect your organization or protect your account from that compromise is really the best thing that you can do. Again, have a good managed IT system in place. Make sure that staff are trained and educated to identify these threats, and then finally make sure that multi-factor authentication is enabled, not only on your personal, your work account, but also in your personal account as well, just to understand that that's kind of in play to be attacked as well.
There's a couple more questions that were in the chat. Specifically, there's a question in here: how do you deal with token theft? If you could take a stab at that.
So I'm not sure if that's like token theft in terms of like physical tokens being stolen, or like talking about the actual authentication tokens themselves being taken. So I think, again, looking at the data that we have, I think some of these techniques like token theft or, kind of zero-day attacks targeting organizations, we're not seeing it in the data for the organizations where we are, working. I think it is more likely that your organization is going to be a victim of, again, a spear phishing attack that leads to somebody giving away their credentials, being tricked into, entering in an MFA code, and then compromising your data that way. So I think for most organizations, those are the types of threats that you're going to be facing. And unless you've already done everything you can to have good foundational controls in place, you've got MFA, maybe you're using physical security tokens, kind of the zero-day attacks, these kind of man-in-the-middle token thefts are not the most likely thing to happen. So I'd really want to understand your organization's risk assessment to make sure that you're kind of designing the right solutions for the types of threats that your organization is going to face. That being said, I think making sure that the organization is implementing good baseline security practices, making sure you've got good auditing and reporting systems in place to identify whenever you've got anomalous activity happening, are all different and important ways to ensure that you've got good visibility into identifying when you may have something like a token being used in a different location or a different context than you were expecting. I feel like I repeat, on and on and on and on, and it's worth doing, because the number one, right, establish an IT acceptable use policy. And why would you do that? And I think it's because it protects against, misguided and misaligned IT initiatives. SANS has a good policy template library, good framework, being able to understand, right, what are the IT systems that you have in place? What data resides within them? Who's responsible for that? Where do they live? Who has access to all of that information, right? All of those elements are important to be able to define so that when something bad does happen, you've got a little bit of a framework in place to say, oh, okay, so this system was compromised. It had sensitive data in it. Okay, we need to do, these things. Or, oh, maybe that was just our it just had sample data and we're not really worried about that. And so it's unfortunate, but, we have a different approach. So again, being able to clearly articulate what data do you have? Where does it live? How are people accessing that information? How are we managing permissions? What devices are people authorized to use? How we enforce that control, are all really important steps. And that, you need to have a policy document that can define all of that.
You mentioned earlier about if you're using, your personal email on the Facebook account that's managing your organization account, then having some policies around, well, you can do that. I mean, Facebook encourages you to have to be able to do that, but then you need to have MFA to log into Facebook, even on your own personal account. And so making sure to spell those things out, I think makes sense.
Yeah. And again, number 2, right? We talked about security awareness training program. Again, I really like know before because of those different elements. Like I like to be able to see, who my users are that maybe need a little bit more training or support. I love the online training tools that are available. Our approach, I like security awareness training to be something that's built into the culture of the organization, right? Should be something that folks are doing quarterly in terms of online training, just to get familiar and just to kind of keep up on the threats and to continue to have new opportunities to learn, because it's not something that you can really do effectively, in one big training once a year if you never really talk about it or think about it. So again, quarterly trainings, monthly phishing, just kind of, make it a part of the DNA of the organization to just, be aware, be attuned to what's going on. And then finally, MFA, right? I mean, I don't think we can say it enough. Make sure that you're using an appropriate MFA method, right? I think physical security keys is where a lot of organizations are going to be moving to. They're fast, they're really secure, they're hard to spoof, right? It's a lot of great things to like about physical security keys. I think Microsoft is going to be pushing us in that direction, but it still requires users to make that change.
I'm not sure if I remember who said it, but I think it might have been Jada in our other webinar who said that she'd rather have a staff person reporting something that was legitimate and just being careful and suspicious of it and, taking the time to fix that than to have them not be reporting something that they weren't sure about. So I thought that was a great attitude to take to it. We have one more question and then we're going to let everybody go. What or how are you folks addressing zero trust models or implementations?
Yeah, I mean, we probably have a whole webinar just on zero trust. I think that is, I think there's some amount of jargon in what zero trust means, but I think to me, what that means is fundamentally, right, never really fully letting an account do whatever it wants, without some kind of interrogation of it. So it does mean, I guess in the old way, right, what wasn't zero trust is in your server room in your office, right? You're in the office, you logged in your computer, done, right? You could get access to everything. You could access anything in the server. And there was kind of that one control point, but once you passed it, nothing else really, kind of stood in your way. Zero trust is kind of this concept of kind of continuous evaluation of risks and making sure that, before access is granted to any system, there's some interrogation of your account, right? Does everything make sense? Like, are you still on a device that's trusted? Have you recently authenticated? Have you passed an MFA challenge? And again, I think that is important because, by default, out of the box, most cloud solutions, right? You can access any system from any device from anywhere, and there's really no restrictions on cloud access at all. And that's been great, especially as many of us over the last 3 years, right? We're all working in hybrid environments. We're using cloud technologies that we've recently adopted. And so that's made it easy to adopt those solutions. But at the same time, it means that your attack surface area is enormous, right? Because you can, log in from Maryland, you can log in from Virginia, you can log in from Nigeria, you can log in from Thailand, like all the different places. And your organization might not be in any of those locations. And so having some zero trust tools in place can allow you to define, I think, more granularly the, kind of where people can access from what devices. And I think that's probably the big area for organizations to be, aware of, right? Is that if there's no BYOD policy at your organization and people can access and synchronize any work data to their personal device, and then they leave the organization and there's like no way to manage or control that, like that's a massive problem. So I think a lot of organizations are just kind of ignoring that issue exists.
Well, and I think we talked in one of our other webinars about if you're working on a home network where the password is password, and you're in a condo or what have you, essentially on an open network. So we have all kinds of, or at a coffee shop or wherever it is that you're working from. It could be in Maryland, but just not in a secure fashion. So, well, we thank everybody so much for sticking with us for a couple of extra minutes here while we had Matt. We could ask him our questions. Our learning objectives to understand the cybersecurity landscape for nonprofits, understand Community IT's approach to cybersecurity, be familiar with the incident types and data from the 2023 report, and then being able to take some basic steps to secure your nonprofit. So we talked about some of those, but more of them are in the report as well. So I understand it's like a ton of information, so we didn't quite have time to hit everything. But really, just thank you so much for your expertise and for answering our questions.
Yeah. Please feel free to reach out. I've been with Community IT over 20 years. I really love the clients that we get to work with. And so if I can help organizations improve their cybersecurity, that's, really, really what I'm here to do. And, I really enjoy that. So please feel free to reach out. Happy to answer any quick questions that you may have.
Do encourage you to get in touch with him, and his contact information is on our website, communityit.com. And we have a bunch more cybersecurity resources there. We have the playbook. We will have the incident report. So we just thank you so much for joining us today. Matt, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll let you go on your way. Thanks again.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.